And welcome back, everyone. Before we get started, a quick note. What you've known as the tactical transition tips is now your next objective. I'll explain the change a little later in the episode. Are you someone who believes you'll figure out what your life will look like when the time comes? When the career winds down? When retirement is close? Hate to break it to you, but that's not usually how it works. The direction of life is rarely decided in one big moment. It's built slowly, through momentum of forward progress. Momentum created by commitments, who you spend time around, the routines that become normal, those that feel practical and necessary. But commitments have an odd side effect. They remove a little bit of flexibility from your future. And over time, you stop designing your path and start following the one that's been formed ahead of you. Because those commitments and relationships have inertia, and they build their own momentum. As veterans and first responders, that momentum can build even faster. The job shapes your identity, your friendships, your schedule, your sense of purpose. It becomes the center of your world, which is why something uncomfortable can creep in when the idea of transition starts getting closer. You begin to realize that the future you assumed that you were going to design may already be taking shape without you noticing. We'll continue with more on this topic, but first, let's take a quick break. There's a moment in life when you realize it was never about you. Grind, spelled G-R-N-D, is different. There's no I in it on purpose. Because the mindset was never about ego. It's about the mission. Started by a former Army Ranger, it's not about where you are. It's about how you show up. Different lives, different pressures, but the same mindset. Grind isn't clothing you wear just to look good. It's a reminder of why you keep going when it gets tough, and you keep putting in the work when no one's watching. This isn't just fashion, it's fuel. Because real work isn't loud. Real effort doesn't need applause. And real purpose doesn't quit. Head over to thegrindcollective.com. That's the GRND collective.com and use the promo code transition15 for 15% off your order. Uncertainty does something strange to people. You can handle pressure. You can make difficult decisions. And you understand that plans rarely survive first contact. But there's a different kind of uncertainty that shows up when you're talking about the future. When the future becomes unclear, your brain looks for stability as quickly as it can. It's not the best decision necessarily. It's often just something that reduces the discomfort of not knowing. Suddenly it's about locking in a job as soon as possible, buying a house somewhere stable, picking a place to settle, securing something that feels like solid ground. And none of those decisions are wrong. The problem isn't the decisions themselves. The problem is the emotional pressure underneath them. Because when uncertainty shows up, urgency tends to follow. And urgency pushes people towards the first option that looks good. That's how momentum quietly accelerates. The first job that offers a good paycheck starts looking safer than exploring unfamiliar opportunities. A predictable environment becomes more appealing than going after something that requires learning a completely different culture. Again, none of that is irrational. It's human. And as human beings, we don't like unresolved questions. We prefer clarity. We prefer certainty. But here's what many of us don't recognize when we're inside those moments. The decisions made to resolve uncertainty can often become the decisions that define the next decade, simply because they were the fastest way to restore stability. But when the question becomes, what does the next chapter of my life look like? That same instinct can quietly push people into commitments before they had time to understand the landscape that they're going to step into. And once those commitments begin piling up, the path forward can start to feel less like a choice and more like a track that's already been laid in front of you. The strange thing about momentum is that you rarely feel it building while it's happening. You only recognize it once changing direction becomes difficult. Because resolving uncertainty feels good, but sometimes the fastest answer becomes the heaviest commitment. And that emotional pull towards certainty might be the only force shaping the decision when you start thinking about life beyond the uniform. There's another pressure that starts to show up as you get closer to your transition. It's the pressure to look like you have things figured out. An internal need to show that everything is under control. Because appearing uncertain about your future can feel uncomfortable, especially in communities where confidence and decisiveness are part of the culture. Admitting that you're still figuring things out can feel like admitting weakness. So instead, many of us move quickly, and we choose something that allows us to answer the inevitable question. So, what are you going to do next? The silly thing is, it's a simple question, but underneath it sits a lot of pressure. Pressure to have an answer. Pressure to appear prepared. Pressure to show that your next chapter is already lined up and under control. And that pressure can accelerate decisions. A job that doesn't align with your long-term interests suddenly starts looking better. You might choose a career path not because it's the best fit, but because it sounds good when you explain it to people. The strange thing is, most of these decisions feel completely reasonable in the moment. And once those decisions are made, and once the job is accepted, the momentum starts building again. Not necessarily towards the life you intentionally designed, but towards the life that made the most sense in the moment when the pressure was the strongest. And the more those commitments accumulate, the harder it becomes to step back and reconsider the heading that you're on. Because momentum doesn't just come from urgency or the need for stability. Sometimes it comes from the simple desire to avoid looking like you're still trying to figure things out. Here's a good point to stop and let me tell you more about the new podcast. We'll get back to it after this. Real quick, let me take a minute to explain what's going on here. If you've been listening for a while, these episodes have been called, or used to be called, Tactical Transition Tips. The mission of the show hasn't changed, but the name has. Going forward, these episodes are now called Your Next Objective, as well as becoming its own standalone podcast. The reason for that is simple. I believe these episodes have grown into something bigger than just a segment inside the Transition Drill podcast. They're focused entirely on helping veterans and first responders think about and prepare for what comes next in your careers and your lives. Separating it into its own podcast makes the episodes easier to find, easier to follow, and easier for new listeners to discover. From now through the end of March, the episodes will still be released in both places, on the Transition Drill podcast and on the new Your Next Objective podcast. But starting in April, the episodes will be exclusively on the Your Next Objective feed. So please, take a second and follow or subscribe to Your Next Objective wherever you listen to or get podcasts, or if you watch on YouTube. Either way, you won't miss any future episodes. And it also helps the new podcast build momentum before the full transition happens. So thank you. Let's get back into this episode. Another thing can happen when you start thinking about life outside the uniform. A feeling of hesitation can seep in because it introduces the question that most people don't think about early in their careers. Who am I when this job isn't the center of my world? Your reputation became tied to how you perform. Your friendships often form through this job. Even the way you view the world got shaped by the environment you work in. Over time, the career became more than employment. It became part of who you are. That's not something to apologize for. In many ways, it's something to be proud of. The work requires commitment, responsibility, and a level of trust that most civilian careers will never demand. But identity built around a single role creates vulnerability. The stronger that single identity becomes, the harder it can feel to explore something outside of it. Sometimes the internal reaction is subtle, but it's strong. It's that voice in your head saying, "Why am I spending time looking into that? It's not really who I am." That internal resistance isn't about capability. It's about identity protection. Our mind tends to guard the role that has given us purpose, recognition, and belonging. And when there's the idea of forming a new identity, it can feel like it's competing with the identity that already exists. So many people simply avoid the tension. They stay fully invested in what they know. They tell themselves they'll figure everything else out when the time comes. But identity has momentum too. The longer a single role remains the center of your world, the harder it becomes to imagine a life where that role isn't there anymore. And when that realization finally arrives, whether it's expected or sudden, it can feel like you're being asked to develop an entirely new version of yourself all at once. Which is why the idea of momentum doesn't just apply to jobs or commitments. It also applies to the identities we build, along with the ones we never give ourselves permission to develop. And once you start noticing that pattern, it becomes easier to recognize how momentum begins shaping your future, long before you believe you're actually preparing for it. Each of us has to accept the idea of life after the job, as it begins to feel real. For some people, it happens when the retirement clock is closing in on zeros. For others, it shows up when they watch somebody else make their transition. Sometimes it's after an injury or a change in policies. But here's something most of us don't recognize. By the time you start actively thinking about transition, a large part of your life already has structure and it's already been set. Taking that assignment that made sense at the moment, buying a home because it felt safe, building friendships with the people you spend most of your time around, settling into routines that worked simply because of the demands of the job. None of those choices were mistakes. They were logical responses to the life you were living. But together, they create a structure, and structure tends to guide movement. However, none of this happens through deliberate planning. It happens because life builds structure long before you begin planning the next phase of it. That's what makes momentum so powerful. It doesn't require intention. It grows from the accumulation of ordinary decisions that slowly narrow the range of options you can choose. Which means the question isn't simply, what do you want to do next? A more honest question might be, what direction is your life already leaning towards? Because recognizing the existing momentum is often the first step in deciding whether to control it, to follow it, or deliberately begin steering it somewhere different. Then, there's the moment that happens for many of us later in our careers, and it can feel pretty uncomfortable. It's not caused by a bad decision. It's not caused by failure. It's caused by realization. You start to notice how many parts of your life have already settled into a set place on the board. From the outside, that stability can look like success. And in many ways it is. Stability is something most people work very hard to build. But stability and momentum are closely related. And momentum has a habit of deciding things before we consciously recognize what's happening. However, none of these shifts happen dramatically. They happen gradually. And that gradual narrowing can be almost invisible while it's happening. This is how momentum quietly turns possibilities into probabilities, by slowly shaping what feels reasonable to pursue. Those elements begin acting like guardrails. They don't eliminate choice entirely, but they guide which choices feel realistic. And here's the hard part to acknowledge. There's no moment where you said, "This is the point where my future is becoming locked in." Instead, it builds quietly through general life decisions. One commitment leads to another. One responsibility creates the conditions for the next one. One environment continues reinforcing the same set of expectations. And eventually, you look up and realize the path ahead feels like a one-way street with no way to turn around. Not because you designed it this way, because it's the direction everything has gradually been pointing you towards. That realization can surprise you. Sometimes it's even unsettling. But once you start seeing how momentum works, you can start paying closer attention to the small decisions that impact your long-term direction. Let's take another quick break. And when we come back, I'll go over the transition-specific tips. So once you start recognizing how momentum works, the question becomes practical. Where is your momentum already pointing you? And more importantly, are you deliberately shaping it or just riding it? Because depending on where you are in your career right now, the forces shaping your future look a little different. Close range group. If you're less than a year from your transition, maybe you're in the middle of it right now. Either way, hold off making permanent decisions. The pressure to establish stability can feel intense. A job offer appears and it feels like that's the responsible move and you should take it immediately. Your instinct is to lock things down quickly so life continues feeling secure. But the first year after transition is often the first time you truly see the civilian landscape with a clear set of eyes. Those industries that looked appealing from a distance may not feel the same way once you're inside them. Those opportunities you never knew existed might start appearing once you begin meeting people outside of this career. If your first moves are permanent, your flexibility disappears before you even understand the terrain. So treat the first year less like settlement and more like reconnaissance. Keep your options reversible while you learn the environment. Medium range group. You're several years away from your transition. Right now, your network is the herd. Most of the people around you are probably in this career with you. That's normal. You spend enough time in these careers and it's easy to become one of the cows, moving along the path, just following the tail in front of you. And the ideas and opportunities you hear about tend to mirror the environments the people around you understand. That's how social gravity works. The circle you spend time in shapes what possibilities feel realistic. So over the next few years, start widening your circle deliberately. Learn how different professions look at work, look at opportunities, and look at growth. Exposure changes what you believe is possible. Long range group, you're early in your career. Transition still feels like a distant concept. So you need to build your parallel identity. Right now, the job likely shapes a huge part of how you see yourself. But over time, relying on a single identity can make the eventual shift out of that role harder than it needs to be. So start building something alongside it, a field of knowledge that has nothing to do with this career. Not because it's an exit plan, at least not today, but to expand the dimension of who you are. Develop your own personal momentum so that life doesn't trap you in a single direction. Always keep options open for yourself. Build something, whether it's financial, educational, motivational, that maybe one day causes this career almost to become your side hustle. And if you want more on this topic, resources, and practical ways to consider preparing for your next chapter, I put out a weekly newsletter that digs deeper into these episodes. If it sounds useful to you, please use the link in the show notes to sign up. It's simply another tool to help you navigate the road ahead. Right now, your life is moving in a direction. Every assignment you take, every bond you break, every step you take, I'll be watching you. Oh wait, wrong group. Sorry. Seriously. Every commitment you make, every environment you stay connected to, it all adds influence to the direction of your future. Most of the time, we assume the big decisions will come later. That one day we're going to sit down, look at the options, and decide what the next chapter will look like. But momentum isn't patient, and it rarely waits for that moment. It builds through the ordinary choices that feel routine right now. And then one day, when you're knocking on the door of your transition, you may realize that a lot of the direction has already been formed years ago. That realization isn't meant to make you nervous or apprehensive. It's meant to make you aware. Because awareness gives you something powerful. It gives you the chance to identify and acknowledge where your momentum is pointing you, and then decide whether you want to keep following it or start nudging it somewhere completely different. That's something only you can answer. And it's a question that needs to be addressed long before the uniform comes off. I appreciate you staying till the end. It helps the engagement ratings. Send me your comments. Be honest with me. What do you like? What am I doing wrong? I can't make changes unless I know what's best for you. Share the podcast with anybody that you think will enjoy it or benefit from it. And don't forget, start following the new podcast, Your Next Objective. Stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.